Welcome to the Yoga PodShop, part podcast, part workshop, but all things yoga. I am your host, Kaycie Nikole, and joining me today is my lovely co-host, Samantha Wiesner. And today we're going to be talking about yoga and education. So all things yoga teacher training, education online, continuing education, all of our experiences. All of our sessions are recorded and available for your viewing afterwards. We hope you enjoy. Hello, Sam.
Hi.
How you doing today?
I'm doing all right. How are you?
I am doing fabulous. I am very much looking forward to talking about this specific topic.
Yeah.
And for those of you that don't know, Sam and I have been working together for years. And we've done trainings together. We've shared our education together. And we work on our teacher training together, our 200-hour teacher training. And I feel like I've learned so much through that experience as well.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're going to kind of get to the gist of it all, but a lot of familiarity here with Sam. It's lots and lots of years of kind of just working together and establishing, sharing education, becoming educated. And so we're going to trace this all the way back to the early start of our yoga teaching journey. And that was, so did you sign up for your yoga teacher training in 2012?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And go ahead and share with me a little bit about your 200-hour experience.
Well, I was looking at that time in my life. Travel was a big priority and I had the time to do it. So I really was looking for an intensive because I wanted to get out of my social working job, my bartending jobs, and I thought yoga was going to be the answer, which in reality it was. It took a while to make that a real reality, but I wanted my certification ASAP. So I was looking for an intensive. So that was kind of the gist of all right, let's I don't really know the question that you asked, but I know that that was my journey to figure out what I was going to. First, I wanted to travel. That was a big thing. And two, I wanted to make sure I got it quickly. So then I just hit Google and I was specifically looking for Vinyasa flow. I should add that too. So a training that focused on that because I had fallen in love with that practice. Prior to that, when I was looking at trainings, years before that even, I was really into the Bikram yoga, and this is before all this stuff came out about Bikram. So I was looking at possibly doing his training. I think that was in Los Angeles. And so I was considering that. Then I learned the Barkin method of yoga, which is someone created that off of Bikram. So similar, it's almost like a Bikram vinyasa. That was a Florida training. And so I was looking into those two, but I then fell in love with vinyasa through Courtney, a similar teacher that we had in Modesto. So then I was oh, love vinyasa. And so that's what I ended up searching for and found a teacher, Jennifer Yarrow from Frog Lotus Yoga, who had a 3-week training she was doing. So 3 weeks, 200 hours. And you would wake up at 5 a.m., be done at 9 p.m. But you know me, I get super, so focused and in my zone that I would be the one that was in the yoga studio till 10 or 11. And I would be the first one up at 5 a.m. I was so fully immersed and I loved it. But it was a lot.
Did you know the teacher? Did you have any research on her ahead of time, or was it kind of just here we go?
I mean, think about it. 2012, that was, think about YouTube was even pretty new at that point, relatively to now. There was not even there was no videos on Facebook. I don't even know if Instagram had maybe just started, and those were just posts. So I found her a YouTube video of her. And I loved the way that she moved, I guess. I loved her flow, and I just had that natural, my intuition, and just looking at the curriculum, my intuition was just yep, this is it. It was called Frog Lotus Yoga. It still exists. The training still exists. Vidya is actually the like founder of the training, and Jennifer Yarrow was her student, who then started taking over the trainings in Costa Rica. Vidya did it in the home studio in like, I want to say it was Massachusetts or like somewhere in like Northeast. And she also did trainings in Spain and I think Bali at the time. But Jennifer mainly did it in Costa Rica. And again, like when I looked up Vidya and I looked up Jennifer, it was just like, oh, like Jennifer's my teacher. So it was just, I didn't know her, but it was like a knowing, like, yep, this is the training I'm going for. So no, but like that in your 200 hours, that's not like, especially when you're young, like a 24-year-old, you're like, I don't know, young in your practice. I wasn't really looking for a teacher. I was looking to learn yoga, right? But she became my teacher. So yeah.
And how long had you been practicing yoga before you decided to sign up?
I mean, do we want to start with P90X?
Oh my gosh, I totally forgot. Okay, you guys, this is so crazy. I don't think I've ever met somebody that has like such a similar story and beginning. So it's just like, it makes me laugh because as soon as you said that, I'm like, oh my gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I'm so glad we both stemmed from that same seed.
Yeah, those DVDs and like Wednesdays, at least it was Wednesdays for me when the Yoga X DVD
The
was.
90 minutes.
Yes, and I just like loved it. Like I was obsessed. And I got one of my friends who had been practicing yoga in actual studios to like come over and do that practice with me. And I remember her being like, this isn't yoga, but it was mainly like Tony being like, yeah, Yoga X. It was great.
Hey, he did ohms at the end. I have to give him credit, you know?
Yeah. And honestly, like I felt so good. It was yoga. Like obviously I got the benefit that I needed to get from it, that I was like, but then when she said that, that's what got me into the studio.
That is so funny. Yeah. I just love that because I mean, obviously the same thing, except slightly different on my end because I actually didn't like the yoga video in the P90X initially.
Okay. Yeah.
Because it was the longest video. And so I was like, oh my gosh, 90 minutes. Okay, here we go. But it was the one I saw the most progress in over the course of like the 90 days. And I think that was kind of what hooked me because I was like, it was mostly about exercise for me and the fitness component. And so it wasn't until I started going to the studio that it kind of opened up into, different, what yoga actually was,
Right.
But very grateful for that Tony Horton, start of it all.
Yeah. So I guess that was like 19 or 20 for me. And then I started practicing regularly in a studio at like 22 years old. So I'd only been practicing regularly, but truly like, nearly daily for 2 years before I decided to do a training. And I think too, that's why it's like, I was into Bikram, and then I tried out the bark, and like I was such in like a discovery mode of like what I was liking, right? So.
Yeah, it's crazy because like I was thinking about this recently about how long I had been practicing before I decided to like take a yoga teacher training, and I want to say it was probably within the first 6 months. I was just like addicted to the practice that for me, I knew I wanted to teach, but I was just like, I just have to take this training. I want to know as much about this practice as I can possibly learn right now. And so, like for myself, I was in the process of figuring my life out because I really wasn't doing anything. I was actually running a little jewelry business at the time, the Naked Feather.
Man, still around. Those were still my favorite earrings I ever owned. I wish I knew where they were.
Every once in a while, I miss that side, that creative side. But it led me to being like, okay, what do I want to do next? And after P90X, I was like, I think I'm gonna, use my jewelry money and sign up for yoga teacher training. And so it kind of just went from there. But so for me, I did not do any kind of research, or like the extent of research that I did was how do I become a yoga teacher? And found out the certification that I needed. And then I saw that the studio, the only studio in town at the time, since we were both in Modesto, they had a yoga teacher training available. And for me, I was like, I have the time. The program was actually an extended program, so completely opposite of yours. It was a once a month. You meet on the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. And it was like, you couldn't finish in any less than like 7 months because of just how it was broken up. And that part was infuriating for me and my patients because I was like, I'm ready to start teaching like yesterday. But I am kind of glad because I do feel like sometimes it's like there's a lot to digest in a yoga teacher training that I was glad I had it broken up to really take in the information. So like in regards to that, how do you feel about having such a condensed program into like, 3 weeks?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, I'm just one of those people that like, I get in that, ADHD, like super focus, like hyper focus. So for me, it felt good because when I have a lot of distractions or if I think about like, oh, working in the middle of it, like it would kind of be hard for me, I think, to like, all right, drop back into that. Where I think at maybe my age now, I would incorporate it more. Like it's just at that age, I think that that's what I needed. And I think I was pretty good at it. There was many people in my program that felt extremely overwhelmed. A few that even dropped out because they realized they needed a longer program or they needed that space. So I would just say I'm just a type that like, nope, give me no other distractions. Let me be fully here. And I could. Now, that said, I can't totally that was my experience, right? So I can't really compare it. The only thing I have to compare it to is like longer versions of studies that I've done since that time. But once you do your first 200-hour training, the studies then never end, and it's right.
A continuous journey.
Right. So I can't really compare it. I don't know that you can compare it.
But you still feel like
depends
you
on
crave
people's lifestyle.
Yeah. I mean, your lifestyle obviously has changed a lot too. You've gone through a lot of different changes and you've moved places and, lots of things have changed. And do you feel like you still very much resonate with that type of, direction or approach?
Well, I'm considering like another training now, the one that you did, Jason Crandall, which I don't know necessarily totally. I know it's not like a 1 month intensive. It's spread out a bit more. And so that'll be kind of my first experience with that. When I was looking at a 500-hour though, I was looking at the same thing. I went and did it in 6 weeks, 500 hours. And again, it was just like full force go. So I do think that's kind of the type of person I am. And I still like that. So that still resonates with me a little bit. But
okay,
yeah,
so real quick, you took a 200-hour and then you took a 500-hour?
I did the 500-hour a couple years, or wait, not a couple. It feels like a couple years because of the pandemic. That was 2019, not 500-hour, 300.
Okay, to get your 500-hour.
To get my 500-hour.
Wow. Okay.
No.
And
my
for the viewers out there, people out there that might not know exactly the tiers of education, let's kind of talk about that a little bit. So the base level of education, because when I was looking at things, I was really confused by, you see like a 10-hour or a 50-hour program, like a training, especially when it says teacher training, it can be kind of misleading sometimes. And so we'll talk kind of about Yoga Alliance to understand a little bit more about the accreditation. So I've actually had mixed views on this specific topic for a long time and feel like it's kind of come full circle for me. But Yoga Alliance is kind of the overseer in the yoga community for teachers, for schools, to register teachers and schools. And they basically have a standard for their curriculum and for the expectations of what yoga teachers should know, or the information that you should be gathering from those trainings to continue your education. And so for them, they break it up into kind of some easy tiers. They're really easy. So 200-hour is the base level tier to become a yoga teacher. So if you're wanting to be a registered yoga teacher, or you want to move in that direction, you want to find a yoga teacher training program that is accredited through the Yoga Alliance for a 200-hour program. And they will use the symbol RYS 200, which stands for Registered Yoga School at a 200-hour level. And that is base level foundational information to become a yoga teacher. So if you wanted to like just start teaching right away, you could find a 200-hour program somewhere in either approach, right? If you wanted to have a condensed version, you can take it in maybe up to 3 weeks, or you can elongate it for a year or more. And then the next step up would be a 500-hour certification. And you have a couple options to get there. Your first option is to take a 200-hour program first, and then at a later point, take a 300-hour program, an RYS 300 accredited course, which will help you achieve a combined 300 and 200 equal 500-hour certification. Some schools will just have the 500-hour program that condenses all of that information into one chunk.
Yeah, I often hear now 300 hours being called advanced teacher training. It's like you go to teacher training, and then I hear like, oh, I did my advanced teacher training here. Now that could also not necessarily be just 300 hours. It's like advanced teacher training in therapeutic yoga. Maybe that was 100 hours, right? So it's just continuing to advance. I kind of look at it when I think of like college, right? Your typical like university. It's like, okay, the 200 hours is like your general education. The 300-hour is like your kind of going towards more your major, like what you really want to focus on. And then all of the studies beyond that, because let's be real, we are always investing in our education. That's kind of like getting your master's. And so like all of that combined, it's just like, that's what I always say is there's not really, if you added up all the money that we spend in yoga education and the time, I'm like, I have my master's in yoga. That's what I like to say. Like, it's just not,
It's true though. Yeah. You really are constantly investing. And the thing is about that with like continuing your education is some of the things you learn do work right along with Yoga Alliance, but then there's also a lot of things that work outside of the Yoga Alliance that you could still gain a lot of really valuable information from. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very curious, so Sam and I, when we operate our 200-hour online yoga teacher training, it is accredited through the Yoga Alliance. And I am a little stickler on things matching the exact hours of what is necessary for that foundational work. And so I like the standard because I personally feel like having a standard is one thing. Like, do I think they're going around and like reinforcing and actually checking in on these things? I think that's a different story. I think it'd be a little bit harder to go about that approach, but I do like having the standard at least, and knowing that you have to qualify, that you meet that standard in order to represent that title. And I guess I'm curious, what trainings have you done that have worked outside of the Yoga Alliance? And how do you feel about, that standard and things meeting that standard or not?
When it comes to getting those numbers, like having those letters and numbers behind my name, I've always looked at RYS and made sure I have that. And one of the reasons is not just because I think we have some studios maybe are not necessarily like needing that anymore, but I think the majority are still looking for that RYS, that's where you did. And because of exactly the standards that are necessary. So in terms of the studies that I've done outside of the 300, 200 that weren't RYS, those were more like I would say my Ashtanga learning, which is a much more like traditional learning. Because if you think about back in, sounds, when you think about how, certification even got started in the US, like first it was people going to India to learn. They came to the States, they wanted to teach yoga in the States, and then regulatory standards were like, wait, what license do you have to teach this? Right. So then people had to go back to their teachers in India and say, hey, I need some sort of like certification. And so, I mean, this might be like a legend, but like there's a story of, Patabi Joyce being like, authorized. And that's why authorized became a thing versus certified. Cause it's just like, he just literally wrote on a piece of paper, authorized to teach yoga, and like gave it to them. But it was more of this passed down from your teacher that like, okay, now you're ready to go teach. So it's just evolved so much since then. And so I would say like a lot of my studies outside of the RYS have been kind of that way, right? And my learnings of Ashtanga yoga was, learning from a teacher that wasn't there to give me a certification, but I took so much of my teaching comes from that. So that's kind of an old school way. And I don't think there's, I don't know if you can actually teach in the States without RYS at this point. Like from doing that, I think no matter what, you're still looking for RYS unless you are kind of putting yourself maybe in that Ashtanga group where you're getting authorized from your Mysore teacher from India. Other than that, like if you're going to any other yoga studio, they're looking for that standardized RYS behind it.
Mm-hmm.
I think Europe and Australia have different ones similar to Yoga Alliance.
Yeah, I looked up with Yoga Alliance. It does say, is it nationwide or is it international? I'm not really sure, to be honest.
Well, I know that they have similar standards. So, like for instance, one of my colleagues here, she lived in Australia. She got all of her yoga teacher training in Australia. She's an amazing teacher here, and yoga studios have welcomed her because she has that certification. The issue about it is even though she's technically 500 hour, she could technically teach as a yoga teacher trainer in Australia. She can't teach it here to be a certified RYS school. So
she would have to go through those same programs
here. So you couldn't go teach it in Australia, right? But there's many people who, like someone in Australia could take our training and they could probably still teach in yoga studios in Australia with Yoga Alliance certification, but they might not be able to train in Australia as a yoga teacher trainer if it works the same way here. Yeah.
I guess that makes sense. It's really interesting because it's like I haven't really met anybody internationally who has gone through that experience,
Mm-hmm. Right.
But yeah, I mean, for the longest time, I think when I was just a yoga teacher, and not necessarily focusing on the educational aspect, which actually it's been a while now since that. I didn't really care as much about being registered as a teacher, which, by the way, everyone, in order to become a registered yoga instructor or yoga teacher, you have to take an accredited program through Yoga Alliance to be able to register through them as an RYT, right? Our registered yoga teacher at a 200 or 500 hour level. And there's different tiers to that as well. So if you have like X amount of experience teaching, you can get an E, which is an experience on your title. Sorry, thought I put it on silent here. And so when you have that on your title, it basically just shows that you have, I am messing this all up here. Sorry about that, everybody. Let me just fix this up. It says, nope, we're keeping it just like this today. Okay. So, so that is the approach you have to take. And so for the longest time living in Modesto, it was just like, it wasn't that like everyone, I guess it's a smaller town. Everyone kind of knew who all the yoga teachers were. So it wasn't like, I don't think I ever had to give an actual certificate, like my certificate of completion to anybody, or even show that I was registered with Yoga Alliance to get an actual job teaching. And so for a long time, I remember even thinking like, gosh, do I even need this? Like, should I even continue paying the renewal fees for my registration? Is it really keeping me from working? Like, no. But as an educator, I think stepping into the world of offering a 200-hour program, it was like, okay, if I want to be able to actually, have people interested in my program, I want to make sure I fall under an umbrella or underneath that standard that's going to also set them up for being able to get a job at studios and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And and so I think that I do stand behind the standard. Like when I actually read the standards and requirements for a 200-hour program, I think it's very base level information. And
I agree. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I wouldn't change it. I look at it, I'm like, I think like a lot of programs. So for instance, a program that I had taken, my 200-hour program, there were a lot of missing parts for me. And I think quality of education, had I gone back, I would have done more research to actually, I was young. I didn't know what to look for. And therefore I just kind of like, was like, it's in my town and, you can start whenever you want to. And I was like, that's cool and convenient and affordable. And so I jumped right on in. And I think that that's the approach most people take to their education. But I'm a very self-motivated person. So for me, it was okay because even though I didn't get all the information, like we didn't have like a lot of practice teaching time. Like I didn't learn how to actually teach students during my yoga teacher training. And a lot of like the important components of like even anatomy and, understanding the physiology of it all. And so was it a lot
more like philosophy based then, or?
I mean, it was, I would say it was heavy on philosophy, heavy on more of the restorative direction.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know the differences really between the yogas. And so I had signed up for, a program that was really geared towards, the therapy, restorative, a lot of the elderly community. There was a lot of that demographic. And I learned a lot from that experience, but there was also a lot of like dead conversational time where just people were sitting around just talking and there wasn't a lot of like, digesting information. And so I had to be self-motivated because I know a lot of people who have also gone through that program that, you want to make sure you're picking something that's actually setting yourself up for success in the long run, that you're going to be able to go out and start teaching right away. Do you feel like in 3 weeks that your training was able to equip you with that? Or did you feel like you had to continue working on that?
I think that you could ask all of the people that I was in training with and everyone might give you a different answer. And I think it just goes with like how they were learning. There were people that came into this training that obviously hadn't done a ton of research on it because they were wanting a bit more restorative, more slow based, like learning to teach. And then all of a sudden they're in this like strong vinyasa sequence, like strict, like sequencing vinyasa was like what it was about. And some people didn't like how many people there were. I think we had a little over 20. And so they were wanting a smaller group. Again, here I am just like, it was perfect, but I really do think so. Maybe that's just my attitude towards like these things, but it really was. And I think that goes to say that I shouldn't say I did a ton of research, but it was like intuitively drawn to like, yep, this is like the teacher. This is the style, like, let's do this. So I went like full force. I want to teach vinyasa. And that's what we stuck on. And it was a lot of practice teaching that we got. We would have just like 3 in a group. that was really what we were doing mainly, was like practice teaching through those 3 weeks. I feel like after just a few days, we started kind of teaching. It was really heavy on assisting. She was a Thai yoga body worker. So that also planted a seed for me to want to learn Thai massage. So she was really like into teaching how to assist, which that's what kind of gave me the anatomy, because I would say that anatomy was lacking maybe a little bit. But that might have just been where I was in my learning at the time. I would say philosophy was lacking a bit. Again, that might have just been, I was so focused on how to teach. And so that's where I was. So I would say that like it did prepare me to teach. I'm not sure. I mean, I think that it's hard no matter what. When I first started teaching, that was scary, right? Like after you get your certification, I don't know if that goes away no matter how prepared you are, because all of a sudden, like you're like, okay, I'm out in the world and people are paying for this versus, you're with your peers learning and you're getting feedback. And she was really great with feedback too. So, and I was taking it pretty hard because it was like very constructive criticism. And then after training, of course, I missed that, because then you're not getting much feedback anymore. So I would say like it was really, I'll say it was really similar to what we do. I mean, packed in 3 weeks, but I would say it's really similar to what we've created. So A plus.
We did it. I have to say, like putting together an entire yoga teacher training like curriculum, it's like in theory, I'm like, oh yeah, like we know all this information. We could just teach it. And then when I start to organize the information, I'm trying to condense everything into the right, correct hours, and then also trying to break it up into digestible pieces. It's like you really start to realize how intricate the whole thing is.
Yeah.
It also makes me think about like teachers in general that are like teaching classrooms of kids, like for an entire school year, they're building their curriculum. And I'm like, whoo, how that is insane. So kudos to you teachers out there, but
for sure.
It's a lot. And, I am glad. So kind of going back to what you said, I do want to give credit to my first yoga teacher training, because I did take away a lot and there was a lot of growth. And had I been looking more for what they actually specialized in at that studio, then I probably would have got a lot more. But my brain was set on vinyasa and like, I want nothing else but that. And so for anyone out there that might be looking for a yoga teacher training, that is a huge piece of advice that I could give to you, is make sure that the studio or the program itself actually aligns with what it is that you're wanting, And I think then when I picked my 300-hour program, which I was also really glad I had pretty decent gap of time between the two, because that experience in between, kind of going back to what you said, like sometimes you just need time to implement the teaching, to feel confident, to build that confidence and competence. And once you get to that point when like, okay, I'm ready for more, like I'm ready to take in more information. And I feel like at that point too, like you could move in an entirely different direction. So originally, before I signed up for Jason Crandall's Vinyasa focused 300-hour training, I had actually signed up for a 300-hour training in Bali, but that was right before COVID. And so that got canceled. And when it did, I think Yoga Alliance was just changing their standard for yoga teachers who wanted to be educators, that you had to be a 500-hour level yoga teacher. And at that point, I was not. And so I was like, man, I've already been doing yoga teacher trainings and hosting them. So now I just have to get the 500-hour certification. So when that didn't work out, I went in the direction of Jason Crandall's, and his was amazing. The anatomy focus, that was probably my favorite thing about him, was the anatomy focus. There was a ton of philosophy as well, which I love, but Jason Crandall, I love him to death as a teacher, but I definitely connect more to his like logical and like approachable way to anatomy and understanding the body mechanics.
Same.
versus his, I wouldn't necessarily call him a highly philosophical guy, but I feel like he understands the yoga philosophy in general.
But I would argue, well, yes, I think he's just really good with both, but I haven't taken his training, but I would say that so much I listen to, he and his wife's podcast, right? Yoga Land. And because the same way that he brings how he brings applied anatomy to yoga, I think he speaks so clearly on philosophy, kind of in a no fluff way about
That's
it.
exactly it.
That I love his approach to I think he is super philosophical, but in a very Jason Crandall way.
Exactly.
That I really, really appreciate. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I guess I'd be curious too, since the program I originally was going to pick was more like meditation based. I do feel like that would have offered me a really good complement to my vinyasa background rather than just reinforcing my vinyasa. But, I also feel, and this will kind of branch into a different topic, is I feel like education has evolved so much and the way that we know how to teach yoga has changed so much that one thing I really valued about Jason's program was that he is so current and consistently up to date with, he works with doctors, PTs, and they are talking about the anatomy of these things that I very much appreciate that about him and his deliverance in that information.
Yeah, I don't know that he uses the word therapy, but I'll say it like it's very much therapeutic. So his applied anatomy to yoga that's why PTs and doctors want to work with him. I think some of his PTs and doctors that he works with were like his students who were like, hey, let's, get together, right? And work together because of his style of teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
And I feel like so many times, like during that training program for myself, it was like certain things got questioned in ways that I'm like, whoa, this has never been talked about in the world of yoga.
Another one of this is again why I want to study with Jason because so much that I have learned and brought into my classes, especially in just the movement based, like intelligent sequencing, all of that come from what I've learned from him because he's like, hey, let's challenge this. Like, let's stay curious about this. I'll also, shout out to my teacher, Peg Mulqueen. She's similar, not in an anatomy way. Like she doesn't really know like anatomical terms, but she is very like, stay curious, stay questioning why you're learning what you're learning or why you do what you do. Like, let's really like break this down. Is there really importance to having your heels a little separate and your toes together in Tadasana?
Right.
Like, what?
Why are we so firm on these certain things?
Yeah. So, so I really, really appreciate his approach, and he has so much free education out there that I have taken such advantage of. I mean, I still have a Yoga Glow account just so I can learn from him.
Does he teach new classes on there?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. He's current with those.
Yeah, current. Mm-hmm. So, I'll just mention like my 300-hour training was not that. That's why I think I'm looking for another 300. And I would not take back the 300 experience that I had. That was in India, and I was purely looking for philosophy, Sanskrit. Give me all the I think that maybe because that was lacking so much in my 200-hour, and I felt like Ashtanga really allowed for like space to bring out the philosophical kind of the sutras, like bring that teaching to the practice because it's so individual. The teaching piece of it, it's not very vocal. So it's just a lot, there was a lot of chanting. I was interested in the rituals of it. So that being said, that's what took me to, okay, I want to study in India. And I had the most amazing Dr. Manjunath, Sanskrit and sutras professor, and it was everything I could ask for. Now in India, I would say like the anatomy is lacking. Luckily, with my massage therapy training, I have all the pieces, so I love that. I guess that I have that. You're more of the anatomy teacher between the two of us, through Jason Crandall's, and I'm a bit more of the philosophy teacher, and so that kind of goes to show like where we went with our 300-hour trainings, and now what we're bringing to our own training. Yeah.
And I feel like now it's exciting because so it's cool that you are interested in doing like a 300-hour program, because I feel like at this point, like I would still do a 300-hour, if the right opportunity arose for like something, it probably would be more meditation for me at this point, just to like go deeper into that aspect and a lot of the philosophies as well. But I also like the idea of just doing smaller continuing education programs and just learning small chunks of information, like kind of going back to what you had said is like, if we are majoring in a specific topic, like what do we want our major to be? Do you want it to be anatomy? Do you want it to be philosophy? Like, what is your interest? And I think people don't even realize how vast yoga education actually is and how many different avenues. Like, it's funny because it's like, okay, yeah, I love pranayama. I love breath work. I love teaching breath work. But I wouldn't call myself a pranayama teacher because I haven't had the education that takes me into the deeper parts of the pranayama practices. And so I feel very, there's pockets that feel more on that 200 foundational level of understanding, which is okay. And I think that, trying to learn it all, like you're never going to, obviously.
You're never going to. Never. Yeah.
So you might as well just pick the things that you already naturally feel inclined to, learn and you feel attracted to,
And then you just keep incorporating it into your own teachings. And that's truly, I think, what yoga is, a science, and science is always evolving. And then there's just like little mini, micro kind of subsets of this broad yoga science, that when you even bring in what you've learned to your own teachings, like you are in a way, you're kind of creating your own style of yoga, which is what your students resonate with, right? Like, and I don't know the words. We're not, I shouldn't say we're not creating something from nothing. We're not kind of taking something and making it necessarily like our own, but we're just taking bits and pieces of what we come to find in the practice that serves us, and then we're delivering it in the way that it served us, and then students resonate with that, and then they decide that they want to go more into the pranayama approach, more into the vinyasa approach, more into the anatomy approach based on what we resonate with, right? So, if I hadn't just naturally fallen in love with Jason Crandall's way of teaching, like I wouldn't be as interested. So
100%. And it's just so interesting because it's the same reason when people show up to a yoga studio, and it's like, you're going to have some students that are like, I'm here for vinyasa. And you have other people and they're like, when are your yin and restorative classes? And so it's like, we naturally are drawn in specific directions. And I remember this, and I'm so curious to hear about yourself as well. But when I was going through a shift, this was probably back in like 2018, going from basically years of only doing like really focusing on vinyasa and like ashtanga, those more like really fiery yang practices. And then all of a sudden I was like dropping into like really deep meditation and like learning so much about that, like you said, I'm taking this and I'm applying those lessons and teachings into my day-to-day life and practices. And therefore I'm inspired to share it with my students. And so I'm giving a part of myself that has gone through that experience and through those teachings, I'm sharing how it's resonated through me. to help them. And I remember when I first started I started adding seated meditations at the end of my classes. And I would have everyone come up, and then I would give an option to either stay seated in a meditation or come down on your back for Shavasana if that's what you wanted. And I remember when I started to kind of do a little bit more of the guided meditation aspect, I had this slight reservation or fear that my students, like, oh, they know me as only the vinyasa person. Like, now I'm going to be like this woo-woo meditation person and like bringing in a whole nother element. And I was a little afraid at first to kind of lean heavily into it. But as soon as I started doing that, it was like the authenticity and the genuine expression of my teaching started to really come through, that actually the students that had been doing that with me were now more interested in meditation and now wanted to learn more on that topic.
And it is because it becomes, you are teaching what you're learning, like, and that's what's authentic, and students feel that. So yeah,
when you can feel someone's passion for their knowledge.
And I think too, if someone has already kind of signed on as like, okay, I like this teacher, I resonate with this teacher, then a student's natural inclination is to go, okay, I'm with you on this journey, and you're learning, and you're now passing this on to me. And then, you know, I love the phrase of like the light, love, and teacher in me sees the light, love, and teacher in each of you, because our students are also going home teaching their kids how to breathe, teaching their kids how to meditate. Like we're all teachers, and we're all just like passing on like the knowledge
that we're true.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, it makes me actually like think back to like during teacher trainings. It happens every single yoga teacher training that the trainee goes, at some point they say, ooh, I'm stealing that.
Yeah.
And I always just have to laugh every single time, because it's just like, where do you think we all got this from? Like, this is nothing new.
Yeah, there's some phrase, I'm sure there's some much more clever phrase than I'll give, but like something about like art, like, is there any, like the question is like, is there actual original art out there? Because all artists are taking from others, like we're all inspiring each other. So is there anything truly original? You know, it's the question. And I'm okay.
Right.
I'm okay with that. Like it kind of shows that practice of the oneness of it all, you know?
And yeah, and I mean, it even kind of goes back to how you were talking about Bikram earlier, right? And it was like someone who was branding a sequence of postures that had been around for a long time. And, you know, that was a very debatable kind of situation. And it was probably the first time that the yogis and, you know, we were all kind of in this contemplation of like, is that something? Is that the direction we're headed? Is it like, are we branding these things and, you know, saying that they are ours because, you know, this is such an ancient practice that it's just so much deeper than that.
Right.
So going back to continuing education, because Yoga Alliance requires yoga teachers or registered yoga teachers to have 45 hours of time teaching and 30 hours of continuing education hours. So whether that's taking classes or something like that, every 3 years. And I think that that's a pretty good standard. I have stopped counting how many classes I've taught like years ago. So now I just put in like, yeah, I did my 45. That's all you need to know. So I meet the baseline on that. But I do input all of my continuing education, unless it's just taking a yoga class. I never do that, but you could. And if they're technically also registered yoga teachers. But yeah, so I see things moving more in the direction of being able to get like a 30-hour program or a 10-hour continuing education program. And I like that Yoga Alliance does have it where it's like, you know, they used to have it where it was like, really, you could get continuing education from any kind of yoga program. And now it's only other certified or verified registered, or I guess it's the continuing education providers. Like if someone is a
Right.
Yoga Alliance continuing education provider, then you can get your continuing education hours through them. And I believe that they might have a standard that works outside of that for someone who specializes in an area of information. Like let's say, a physical therapist or something. And I think that you could also include someone like that who has an expertise and has, X amount of hours of experience to be able to continue as well.
Right.
Have you taken any smaller programs or trainings?
Yeah. I mean, my restorative yoga training was smaller. I can't remember. I think there was level 1 and level 2 with Sherry Clampett and Arturo Peel in San Francisco. That was, I think, 80 hours, like 40 hours each. And I mean, I would say like, that's like the big one. Other than that, I've done like, some shorter ones too. But David Kyle was the first one that I had done online yoga teacher training with, even like assisting, which got me continued education hours. But you're like, how do you learn how to assist on an online program? And this is way before COVID. He was a massage therapist. I met him at a yoga retreat with Peg. And he's the yoga anatomy guy. So he has a really great book, Yoga Anatomy, one word. Functional Anatomy. It's a fantastic book. And his website has a ton of different, 10 hours, 15 hours, like a lot on anatomy. So I would say he kind of became my applied anatomy teacher for a little while before I became licensed as a massage therapist. So that being said, I don't know how many hours I did under him, but I did like little modules under him like each year. So those are, I would say, like the big ones. And I'm sure I'm like forgetting some.
Now, in regards to that, I am curious because now I feel like since COVID, things have moved progressively into an online direction. And so for me, having both experiences of an in-person and an online teacher training program and being able to kind of have my thoughts and opinions on both and the comparisons between the two. In person, I think was amazing because there was so much just interpersonal connection and like real like bonding relationships and like there's that physical, but I will say when I took my 300-hour program with Jason online, it was so amazing for me. I do think you have to be fairly self-motivated once again, because if you can't get yourself to do the training, then it's going to be really hard. Like sometimes people respond better to having physical accountability. And I definitely understand that. But so for me, what I loved most about it was my schedule was all over the place and it was always kind of like, I got to do this or that. And so being able to have like a really set time felt kind of constrictive for me. And so it felt nice to have the freedom and flexibility of doing the training when I had the time to do the training in the day. And so I still was showing up and making sure I got it done, but it was so flexible and easy to work it in with my schedule. It was a little more distracting as far as, when you're doing really hard postures and practice, it's so like when you have a teacher in front of you, it's just like, there's so much more, energy, I guess, or no one's going to see if you just sit down and start, doing whatever. No one's going to know that you went and did your dishes in the middle of like a training, and so that part was, you have to have strong will. But I thought it was so amazing and I could rewatch the content. And that part was super helpful when there was a really dense subject, and especially in a 300-hour program when it's just like so dense. I did rewatch content just to be like, okay, did I really get that concept in there? and they give you, X amount of time to finish the content. And if you're in person, what I'm really starting to notice a big difference between online content and in-person content is you go to a training or a class in person, and when you go home that day, it's done, it's over, and you don't have that information again. You start fresh the next time you go do a training or something, right? It's not like that information is recorded in history and like it's permanent. And so online feels a lot more like that's there, like set. I know we had this conversation as well in regards to our yoga teacher training.
Yeah. And also our students said that they had to review, or they liked being able to have videos to review certain lectures that felt like a little too dense, or maybe they weren't like fully there. And I will say, even when you were saying that, I'm like, oh man, I can even think of some lectures in my 200 hour now that I know I wasn't fully there, that I wish I had had a recording of to like listen
So
to
helpful.
again. Yeah, because you are just trying to get through it. And this goes for anyone in school. Everyone who's been in school knows that there's been times where they like zone out. They have a quiz. They just have to like get through and push through, and then they have to move on. Where I think the best thing, it's going to be this way again with any kind of online training, but the best piece is that you can pause. You can, take that time. If you notice that you're not there, you're like, all right, I have time. And we're making hours longer for that reason too. So people don't feel like they have to push forward so fast without digesting first.
Right.
So I think that's important. And I'll say, I think you asked me, like, do I still resonate with that now, with how my life is now? I'm not in a place anymore where I can or necessarily even want to go to a month-long, training somewhere. I have life here that I'm really invested in. And now when I travel, I kind of want to be more on a vacation sense, I guess, versus study. So now I am looking more into that slower pace of so I can understand the people who want an online program and how that fits so much better with their life, especially, I'm not a parent, but I think about parents who have always wanted to do a yoga teacher training, or people who have wanted to do a yoga teacher training, don't necessarily want to teach, but they just want to learn more. Like how easy it is that online yoga teacher trainings are available now. They don't have to it's a lot to think I've got to set aside my life to make sure every single weekend I'm at a studio and away from my family or my work for 48 plus hours, right? So
it's a lot.
It is. So I think that so much yoga teacher training going the online direction. You look at everyone working from, so many people, well, not myself, but many people working from home now. That too is allowed space for them or it's allowed time and space for people to do their dishes and do their laundry, in between. Now, hopefully with this kind of training, you aren't doing it in the middle of a 60-minute vinyasa class, but you can do it right after it, right? You don't have to okay, guys, come back. I know you've been studying for 4+ hours today. Go get a quick lunch and come back to the studio in 30 minutes, right? Which can be really overwhelming. So I like, and I can say just from learning online myself prior to COVID, this isn't new. Now it's just, potentially saturated. So much online yoga teacher training out there now.
And that's a huge thing in itself too, because although it is very accommodating to how life and people are now, I also think that we have to be very smart about programs that we're picking in this way, because it is so saturated. But the thing is I feel like there's a lot of programs out there that are not well developed or have not put as much effort, heart, and soul into it, that, there's a lot of programs out there that you're done and then you're just like, I don't know what I'm doing and I don't know where to go. And there's no real foundation that it's built or any confidence that it's built. And I've had people go through that experience. And especially during COVID, when the standards through Yoga Alliance, they recognize like it was all in person before. And in order to even have any online, it was like you had to go through an application process and like make sure you qualified. And there were only X amount of programs that could do it. And then when COVID really blew the doors open, it was like that standard kind of went out the window a little bit.
Right.
And so how do you feel like, have you taken any online trainings that you feel maybe were a little like less than par or?
No, I haven't. And I don't want to totally speak for my friends, but I'll say that I have heard from teachers who did their yoga teacher training online that have, attempted to teach here, how much they have said like they did not feel very prepared. And I also have a friend who did an online teacher training. And again, I'm just not going to say the online teacher training's names out loud, where they felt very prepared. So it's the same thing that goes with the in-person trainings, mine and your experience, right? Where some people felt in a in-person training, they felt super prepared. Another in-person training, they didn't. And I think that goes with online as well. And I think that kind of, I would argue that it has to do more with, as a yoga teacher training, trying to like do quantity more so over quality control. Just trying to sell as many versus having more of a personable experience. And I'll say, I'll argue this point too, is when I was an online teacher for you, even when you were doing in person, and we could do like I think at that time we could do like 40 hours online or something. And I was doing that piece. I still felt so connected to that group of students when we were in our online Zoom class. I still don't even know if some of them I've met in person, and yet we have an online relationship that still feels very like a teacher student and a close bond, even though it was online. So I like how our training, we're still meeting in person pretty regularly to have that. We're still having an online group where people can join in community. So while I haven't done a lot of yoga teacher trainings online as a student, I have joined other communities of learning, coaching communities where I was learning more how to build my massage business, and having a community, even if it's a Facebook community, I still was able to go through their program and feel like I was making friends in this Facebook group that I still feel connected to and I've never seen in person. So I think it's totally possible for us to still build that camaraderie online. And I think that element is missing in some yoga teacher trainings online, likely.
Absolutely. And I do have to say, going to that, like, I am very, like, when I decided to shift things into the online direction and saying, okay, I'm not going to do in-person teacher trainings, I'm going to switch it all into an online format, that was the piece that I was most concerned or focused on, was how do I not lose the community and the feeling of being supported? Because as I think too, maybe that's my own personal experience of when I was going through my 200 hour, that's what I lacked, was feeling supported. And so maybe that's why it's such a strong emphasis for me moving forward, is like, okay, like that's something that I see as being extremely beneficial, and the community connection piece. And so, side note for all y'all out there, if you do sign up for an online yoga teacher training that is not our own, make sure that there are live interactions. Otherwise, it does not meet the standard of Yoga Alliance. You should have at least 30 hours of live interpersonal connection with your lead trainer, not just some person that they hired or, a replacement piece, like them. You should have 30 of their hours. So Sam and I are both lead trainers for our online 200-hour program. And we've kind of designed it in a way that, the first one that now we've done online was more of a condensed intensive, but not quite a 3-week intensive. 3 months was enough. And that still was a pretty full time for, a lot of people with a busy schedule and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But now we're moving more into an extended period, about 6 months to complete it. So a little bit more extended out. When we had the intensive, we met live in person for about 4 hours each time, every 2 weeks, And so now that we're stretching it out and basically doubling the time, we're meeting up once a month, same amount of time. But outside of that, it's like, you should be getting feedback from your teacher. You should be practice teaching. You should have support, because here's the thing is, if you're teaching and you're getting practice time teaching, that's great. But if there is not someone who knows what they're doing that's saying, hey, I noticed you did this, or what if you try it like this? If there isn't someone providing you valuable feedback to help you continue improving, you're not going to know where you're making little, mistakes or mishaps,
Mm-hmm.
You
Right.
need that guidance and support. And so I'm really grateful that we have structured it the way we have, that still focuses on that, because here's the thing. We could make it way easier on ourselves by just saying, you guys do all the work and we'll just do minimal. We'll just sit back and let you do your thing. But then we also, when we have had discussions, I remember just like being like, I want my yoga teacher training people, whenever they get certified and they're ready, they're graduated, like I want them to feel proud to have taken the training and to feel equipped. But I also want to feel like proud myself of being able to put my stamp and be like, yeah, like that is, that's, I like my education can provide a very solid foundation for people. Like I want to know that. I don't want to feel like I'm giving, a half-assed experience for people and then them carrying that title of, New Moon Yoga Academy 200-hour teacher training. Because I don't want, to be quite honest, I just don't want shitty instructors out there that are just half-assing the experience to represent that education,
Right.
So,
right. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not sure I should say this because I think it might go into a longer conversation. But 200 hours, we should say it's a lot, but it's not a lot when it comes to the vastness that is yoga. And that's where I think the whole question of Yoga Alliance, like that's been so questioned, right? The standards of, well, does 200 hours really make a yoga teacher? And that's the thing, is there's a lot of yoga teachers that come out with their 200 hours and they do not feel prepared. So yes, are they really a yoga teacher? At what point do you feel prepared? So even if you do get your 200-hour yoga teacher training through us or anyone, and you aren't feeling like I'm ready to teach, well, then that's okay. And I think that that's also normal to be like, okay, I did 200 hours of yoga, and these are the pieces that I still need to work on. This is the work that I still need to do. So you're still going to stick with your teacher. Again, maybe it is the teacher that you did your 200-hour training with. Maybe you find another teacher, but that too, I don't think if I was continuing to learn and want to learn, like, would I have been ready to teach? I still graduated hungry, right? Like I didn't graduate like, okay, I'm a teacher now. And I think we need to be real about that, because I think that that's why, yoga teachers, there's so many yoga teacher trainings that are churning out teachers, as fast as they can for profit. That ROIS is kind of losing its value. And now there's this question mark of like, okay, like what makes a yoga teacher? And it is that just continual like hunger, desire to teach, desire to keep learning, because the best teacher is a student, which is why I've stayed in school, and you too. So I think that, we need to say that too, is like, yes, we want you to be prepared to go into a class and teach. That is what we are doing, because we also want you to succeed. And at the same time, to be real and know that like there's so much more learning after 200 hours as well. It doesn't just make
so
you,
true.
and you need to be, that's the same thing that goes as when you go to a yoga teacher, or go to a studio, like someone who's just got their, yoga teacher training in 200 hours. Be mindful of that too. Like, okay, they've just got, they've just done their 200 hours, like give them grace and also understand that that's where they are in their teaching. And that's why, again, I'll go back to like the history of it is there was no, okay, you did 200 hours of practice with me, you're authorized, right? It was a student being able to show that they understand the practice that then you give the stamp
The embodiment.
Right. And that they've done the work. They haven't just been washing the dishes and putting, like I was just letting
It's
it
true.
run and not paying attention. Right. Then that's it.
Yes.
Then it really is, self-driven, I think, no matter what training you do.
And, I can definitely stand behind that. Like, I 100% agree with that. And I think that there are a lot of variables that go into that readiness to teach. And there's like, so for instance, kind of what comes to mind is, first of all, when people ask, how long should I be practicing before I do a yoga teacher training? And it's like, okay, well, it used to be a lot more specific on like, you have to embody X amount of like, the practice before you get that, authorization or whatever. But nowadays it's a lot more loose and lax, and a lot of the training programs do gear towards beginners. And I feel like even our training itself, like a beginner can take our online training and be equipped. But I will say two things in regards to that. If you do have more knowledge and understanding of the practice, you have been practicing for a while, you've learned a lot of the verbiage and the postures and all of that, you will be in a better position going into the yoga teacher training, that you're not going to have to build as much of the foundation. You're already going to have the foundation that you get to build up from that. So I have noticed directly in my past yoga teacher trainings with the trainees, a huge part of people's readiness after yoga teacher training partly has to do with how much have they actually been practicing beforehand. And it's not to say that you can't still be ready if you are a newbie, but you are going to have to take in a lot more new information in general. And the second level is the level of involvement and energy you actually put into the training. If you are like, I'm going to skate by just doing the minimal amount of the training requirements, then you're going to get the minimal amount of return on that training. And I think that you can still gain a lot from that, and you can still be ready, but the more you put into it, the more you're going to get out of it in the long run. And so I think that there's a lot of different variables that feed into that readiness.
Totally.
And yeah, so with that, I also think I'll finish this off with this last little piece, which will just be for anyone that is looking, like if you're a yoga teacher and you're like, I'm just not ready, like I don't feel 100% ready, like that's okay. You can take additional trainings. You can practice teaching with your friends and family, just, test it out and keep going. Or if you're looking for more like personal guidance, get a mentor, get someone who can help step you through better sequencing, better cueing, better class structuring, and understanding those key fundamental principles if they were not laid out for you during your yoga teacher training. There are, Sam and I both offer great mentorships. We are happy to work with yoga teachers, but there's plenty of other people as well that if you find the right teacher, someone that you really like working with, they can really kind of take you to the next level if you are feeling kind of in that sticky position.
Totally. Feedback. Never like, it was such a hard thing to receive, in the beginning. And then you're like, oh, it's like, I'm so grateful for every bit of criticism I've gotten, even from, students, or even, certain, even when I've taken certain things with a grain of salt or gotten criticism and be like, no, I actually choose, right. Like, that actually confirms more for me.
Yeah. There's been a couple tears shed where I'm like, oh, woe is me. And then I'm over it.
Me too.
I remember actually, I just have to share this one funny story. I remember actually interviewing for a job in Turlock with Anna. And I just love her in that studio. But I remember when I taught a class and she gave me great feedback, and I started teaching there shortly after. But I remember her saying, she was like, have you noticed how much you say the word beautiful in class? And I was like, I don't say that. And then literally like the next class I was teaching, I caught myself in how much I was saying it. And I was like, oh my gosh. Like,
right.
crazy.
I know. I love these. Corinne was one of the first ones who hired me at Koru. And she didn't give me much feedback, but you know what she challenged me on, which like very early on in my teaching was no music. Try to teach without any music. And I but I realized how much I was dependent on me, and I still love teaching with music. But it really got me clearer on my words, because, okay, it's just my words. And that's really, I think, what she was trying to challenge me on, was like giving more direct cueing. And just hearing myself. I think she really wanted me to hear myself because I was just so focused on being a DJ.
Oh, the growth of humility.
I know, right? It's like, no.
I love that so much.
I know.
Is there
so
anything
grateful.
else you would like to share before we wrap this up?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm sure I'll think about a bunch of things after we get off.
Well, we have plenty more yoga pod shops to come. Next one we have coming up, we're actually rescheduling it for December 1st, which will be a few Sundays from now. Sam might join us. We'll see. But I have this one going on with my friend Kayla, who has also been in the yoga teaching scene for a while. And it's going to be on how yoga changed my life, which is a pretty vast topic. So, yeah, that is it. Thank you all for watching. And we would love to hear your feedback in the comments. Reach out to us. Give us a follow, a hello. We're always down to just continue meeting more of our people and building this community together. So yoga education, get out there, do your research, find the right programs for you. And if you need any help along the way, feel free to reach out to us anytime. Thanks so much, you all.
Ciao.
Bye.